We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It's Monday. We're starting out yet another week. Had an interesting weekend, plenty of stuff to talk about. What's coming up this week is even more interesting. Of course, we know that Letitia James' lawsuit against Donald Trump, Eric Trump, and Don Jr. starts today. And we know that Don Jr., Eric, and Donald Trump are on the witness list. So this week's going to be interesting. It's going to be kind of anticlimactic because we know that the judge had given a summary judgment so that Donald Trump is in fact liable for the fraud that was committed. There's a few other pieces they have to go over in this trial. And most importantly, what they're going to decide is how much Donald Trump will have to pay, what the punishment will be. Now, a lot of people think the punishment was that they are putting all his businesses in receivership, and those receivers will then dismantle and dissolve his companies. That seems like a lot of punishment, but the fact of the matter is they're just trying to unwind all this shit, pay off any debts, and try to get everything straightened out. All this money was gained through ill-gotten gains, and they have to make it right. So while Donald Trump will be severely punished by having all his companies gone, that isn't the punishment. The punishment is yet to come. And we know Letitia James is asking for $250 million, but we know that's just a starting point. There's a lot more that could be considered. We could be looking at 500,000, 600, or 500 million, or 600 million, or even over $1 billion. All of that is conceivable. And frankly, Donald Trump doesn't have the money to pay that. So then what happens? After they pay off all the debt, they may have to liquidate properties because Donald Trump doesn't have any say anymore. The receivers will have to do whatever they have to do to pay off the debt. And then if there's any money left over, then that will go toward Donald Trump's fine. Now, presumably, unless, of course, Donald Trump has the cash hidden somewhere, but that doesn't show up in his taxes, so that doesn't make sense unless he lied about it and hasn't paid taxes on it. And that's distinctly possible too. So, anyway, a lot of interesting shit coming up. I wanted to talk about something, and it's kind of fortuitous that I decided to talk about this early on in the podcast because news just came across the wire, as they say, to kind of verify what I was suggesting. And you know how I like to be right. Anyway, I did a TikTok earlier yesterday, and I was getting kind of annoyed by watching a bunch of creators, most of them small creators, but on their videos, they're getting hundreds of thousands of views. Now, these creators, they came up with a conspiracy theory. Now, we can presume that they're Democrats, but we don't know if Republicans are just planning this in the minds of people's heads. But I heard what these people were suggesting is going to happen, and it just pissed me off. It's absolutely ignorant. So anyway, we know Dianne Feinstein passed away. She was a U.S. Senator. Now, Gavin Newsom, who is the governor of California, his job is to appoint a successor to fill out the rest of the term, which would be January 20th or thereabouts, 2025. So maybe a year and a quarter. So this person will go into the job and do what Dianne Feinstein was doing, but she'll be there for the remainder of the term. Now, there was some concern over this because we know a lot of Democrats have an eye on one person to take that position, and that is Adam Schiff, who's currently in the House of Representatives. Now, he was going to run, I presume he still is, going to run in November for that Senate seat. They were hoping that Dianne Feinstein would hold on, she'd retire, and then they'd start fresh with an election, presuming that Adam Schiff would win. One of the reasons they kept Dianne Feinstein going is because they didn't want a new face appointed, because then that person would be an incumbent running against Adam Schiff, and that would put a different spin on this whole thing. Now, Gavin Newsom made the commitment that if he needed to appoint a senator, it would be a woman of color. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to who that might be. Could have been Barbara Lee, who's a member of the House, I believe. It could have been anybody. But here's what the conspiracy theory was. This is what people were talking about. And I watched TikTok after TikTok of people saying this, and it annoyed me because it's fucking ridiculous. These people were acting as if they knew something, they had an inside track. Here's what I think. Well, who gives a fuck what you think? You've got 3,200 followers, and all your other videos have nothing to do with this. Anyway, this is the same story that all of them told. Here's what's going to happen. Gavin Newsom is going to appoint Kamala Harris as a senator, which seems weird because that's where Kamala Harris came from. Why would she take a demotion from being vice president to going back to be senator? That makes no sense. And then Gavin Newsom would be appointed to be the vice president to Joe Biden. Makes no sense either. Gavin Newsom has very specifically said he's not going to infringe on Joe Biden at all. He's going to wait till 2028 and then he'll think about running for president. Anyway, it doesn't stop there. So Gavin Newsom would become vice president, and then just before the election in 2024 November, Joe Biden would step down, hand the keys to Gavin Newsom. He would run for president. He would beat Donald Trump, and everything would be hunky dory. Now, I don't know where people get off predicting this type of thing. I mean, it's almost like wishful thinking. Well, we've got Joe Biden. He's an old guy, so we'll get a young guy in there. And this is how it could work where we get Gavin Newsom in as the candidate. Now, I like Gavin Newsom, and I think he probably will be a presidential candidate, but not in 2024. This whole conspiracy theory is absolutely bullshit. I said that on TikTok, and I'll say it here. And guess what? I was proven right. Because California Governor Gavin Newsom has appointed somebody to fill Dianne Feinstein's spot. She also happens to be a woman of color. He announced he's appointing Emily's List president, LaFonza Butler, to finish out the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's Senate term, making good on his promise to fill the vacancy with a black woman. The swift appointment was essential for Democrats' power in the Senate, where they have a slim 50-49 majority and following Feinstein's death at 90. And this is kind of important. We've got a lot of stuff going on. The Senate has a Democratic majority, but with Feinstein gone, she wouldn't be voting, obviously. So they needed to get somebody in there quickly, and that's exactly what they did. So this conspiracy theory is absolute bullshit. But here's something that I find interesting. This is what I find interesting. This LaFonza Butler. I've never heard of her before. I'm familiar with Emily's List, but I don't know anything about her. Did they pick her because she's really not a politician per se, and that she might not run in 2024? She's just serving the state by filling in, and then when it's done, she'll just go back to doing what she's doing. Now, I don't know. I mean, you get a taste of being a senator, I would think you'd want to stick around for a little bit, maybe run again and get a 6-year term. I don't know what's going to happen with this, but the whole concept of Gavin Newsom appointing Kamala Harris was bullshit. It is bullshit, and this proves it's bullshit. It's just ridiculous. I really get tired of people going out on TikTok and coming up with this wild ass shit. And because people are prone to scandal and gossip, they just flock to it. And they will believe anything that sounds salacious or sexy or sensational, regardless of whether it has any legitimacy or makes any fucking sense at all. So I like to go find these TikTokers, and there was a number of them. I saw at least 5, 6, 7 of them spewing this information as if they knew something, how they knew anything. I mean, I do this all day, every day. I don't know anything. I have no inside track. I just take a look at what's going on and try to decide what makes sense, what's logical, what's common sense. That's all I do. And that's why I'm not always right. I will be wrong from time to time, and that's cool. I don't mind being wrong. My wife points it out all the time. So this ain't nothing new. Know what I'm saying? Anyhow, so LaFonza Butler will be appointed or is appointed to the U.S. Senate. She will take Dianne Feinstein's place in the Senate. We will have the majority again, and this whole thing with Kamala and Biden and Gavin Newsom, all bullshit. It never was going to happen, and now it can't happen because what happened was far different than what these soothsayers, these dumb fucks were saying on TikTok. All right. I have one email to address. So let's do that. Hi, Mike. Well, the House actually passed a clean continuing resolution. There's really no surprise that the Senate also passed it. I'm now waiting to see if they try to vacate Kevin McCarthy. My guess is it will be like the debt ceiling and they won't call for a vote. I tend to agree. And we'll talk more about this later, but Matt Gaetz is threatening. Now he's being pressured. He's kind of being put in the corner. He made these threats, but this is what bullies do. They make threats and they never follow through because they really aren't as tough as they act. And Kevin McCarthy, I think, knows at this point that Matt Gaetz has a problem. In order to vacate Kevin McCarthy from the speakership, he's going to need 218 votes. Well, Matt Gaetz doesn't have 218 Republican votes. And he was also asked, well, then will you ask for help from the Democrats? No, I will never do that. Well, it doesn't matter if he asks. The Democrats aren't going to help out on this. More than likely, the Democrats won't even vote on it. Kevin McCarthy won't have his position vacated. Then all of a sudden, Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus will be exposed for the weak-ass bitches that they are. But Jake Tapper was interviewing Matt Gaetz, and why he's going on all these left-leaning shows, I'm not sure. Maybe he's just using this as fodder when he runs for governor of Florida upcoming. But anyway, Jake Tapper said, well, Kevin McCarthy did exactly what you said he should not do, and that is pass a continuing resolution with the help of the Democrats. Now, Matt Gaetz knew that he wasn't going to have enough votes to pass the continuing resolution with Republicans. He knew that wasn't possible. So he was basically trying to corner Kevin McCarthy to do what he wanted and hold his job over his head. Well, Kevin McCarthy did exactly what he did with the debt ceiling. He caved to Joe Biden and did the only thing he could do, because to be perfectly honest with you, if the country had been shut down, that would have been far worse for Republicans and Kevin McCarthy himself. So now the bluff has been called on Matt Gaetz, and Matt Gaetz is talking some shit. Jake Tapper asked him, are you now going to file a motion to vacate tomorrow morning, meaning today? They did this yesterday. Matt said something interesting. He says, oh yeah, I'll definitely file a motion to vacate this week. Well, Matt, why not tomorrow? The crime has been committed in your mind. Kevin McCarthy went against you. Hey, Beavis or Butthead or whichever one he is, why don't you just get on it? But he doesn't want to do it any more than Kevin McCarthy wants it done, because this will expose Matt Gaetz for being just a fucking buffoon, a charlatan. But then Jake Tapper asked him, he said, listen, if it doesn't pass and you don't ask the Democrats for help, what then? And of course, Matt Gaetz, like all Republicans, always leave them themselves an out. Says, well, if Kevin McCarthy isn't vacated from his position as Speaker of the House, if next week he's still the Speaker of the House, well, then we know he's owned by the Democrats, even though the Democrats may not even vote at all. See, he's trying to find a way out because he knows he's going to lose this one again. You would think after all this time, Republicans would be getting tired of being embarrassed. But they always stand up, puff out their chest, and make claims that are just fucking ridiculous. Anyway, the email goes on to say, I saw a clip of a Democratic representative saying about the bill that it includes a pay raise for members of Congress. I tried looking through the bill but didn't see it. However, there is a lot of legalese in there. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure the 27th Amendment makes it so they can't vote themselves a raise, but it has to start at the beginning of the next Congress. If there is a raise in there, that should piss off Americans. This has been the least productive Congress possibly in history. I hate to say it, but if they passed a raise, it was actually pretty smart. I say that because this bill is really only in effect for 45 days otherwise. It did pass with bipartisan support, so neither side will challenge it in court. I hope that these lazy politicians didn't get a raise and they actually get something done. Well, I don't think anything's going to get done in the House of Representatives until after the 2024 election, after January 20th of 2025, when the Democrats take control of the House. I don't think anything's going to happen at this point. Well, let's be honest. If Matt Gaetz were successful in vacating Kevin McCarthy from the speakership, and since they've got nobody else that can garner 218 votes, we could be without a Speaker of the House in the House of Representatives, and that means nothing gets done because the Speaker of the House has to present the bills. Don't worry about that. Kevin McCarthy's not going to get vacated. The only way Kevin McCarthy might get kicked out of the speakership is if some of the more reasonable-minded Republicans went to the Democrats and said, hey, let's pick somebody better than Kevin McCarthy, maybe even a Democrat. We'll get your 212 votes and we'll get 6 votes and we'll just blow Kevin McCarthy and MAGA out of the water. Now, that would be cool. I just don't know if any of them have the balls to try to pull something like that off. So I think what's going to happen is Matt Gaetz is going to prance around and make these threats. If he does put the motion to vacate up, he's going to lose. Chances are more so that he won't. He'll say, well, I'm not going to do it yet because of this, because of that. There'll be some fucking excuse for it. But I wanted to talk about those two things because I did a TikTok about this too. We get the continuing resolution. This is good news. The country doesn't shut down, but there are people in this country that are just not happy unless they're fucking miserable. They are constantly negative. No matter what happens, it's always going to be worse later. I mean, I get this now. You know, you had people say, oh, Donald Trump will never get indicted. And then he gets indicted and they say, well, he never will be convicted. Or regarding the lawsuit, he'll never pay the fine. Well, big fucking deal. They're going to take everything he owns. Of course, he's not going to pay it. He won't have enough money. But that's the attitude people take. And they said two things about this continuing resolution. What they said was, well, Ukraine was taken out of this budget. So we're not going to give Ukraine money anymore. Now, hold on a fucking second here. We've already given Ukraine a lot of money. We have a commitment to them. Do you think the Democrats and Joe Biden would sign something that would preclude them from ever giving Ukraine any more money? Come on. There are other ways to get them money, other bills that they can run through, and they will pass. So the fact that it wasn't in this continuing resolution doesn't mean shit. And it's interesting, when Matt Gaetz was interviewed by Jake Tapper, he said something weird. I don't know if it's true or not, but he said, and now we find out that Kevin McCarthy worked a side deal with Joe Biden as far as getting Ukraine money. So basically what happened, they took this continuing resolution to keep MAGA happy, no Ukraine funding in it. But Kevin McCarthy said, listen, we need to get this done. I am fried if we shut the country down. Here's the deal. The Ukraine stuff isn't in it, but we'll work it out after the fact. And Biden at this point has been lied to by Kevin McCarthy already, so I'm sure he's covered his ass in that situation. But the other thing people are whining about, and as Eric, who wrote this email, our friend from Iowa, said, everybody was saying, well, yeah, this continuing resolution has a pay raise for members of Congress. Now, I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read the parts that reference monies like that. The only thing I've seen in there is about 4% cost of living allowance raises. Okay. For federal employees, we're talking military, and theoretically, I guess the members of Congress would get that same COLA raise. If that's what we're talking about, whatever. The most important thing was not shutting down the government. And again, this is just a stopgap. It's 45 days. It's not for fucking eternity. When the next budget comes out, they can adjust things and whatever. But the idea that the Congress give them huge raises and it's a big, you're just looking for things to bitch about. I tell people this, just be happy. Take things a step at a time. The first and foremost thing we had to do is not shut down the government. We got that covered. There is no draconian cuts in it like MAGA wanted. So that's a win. Take the fucking win. Now, when it comes to Ukraine and raises and all that stuff, let's deal with that another day. Let's deal with the impending tragedy, which we did. It's been taken care of. And again, like I said yesterday, this worked out exactly like I expected it to work out, exactly like I said initially. The thing is that this is what politicians do. They did it with the debt ceiling. They'll stand there and they'll push and they'll butt heads and there'll be no movement between them. They'll sell this as some impending Armageddon. Oh no, they'll never come to terms. They'll never come to terms. But if you remember, I said, you know what? I believe they will come to terms. It will not shut down. They will not shut down the country at the last moment of the last day. They will cut a deal. And that's what happened. Literally within hours left, Joe Biden signed that continuing resolution. Apparently, politicians love the dramatic. They love to appear to be the heroes. They had 8 months to work this out. And the fact of the matter is, Kevin McCarthy and Biden had already worked it out, but Kevin went back on his word. And that's why we were where we were. This is just how they do things. I said that they would find an answer in the final minute of the final day for one reason. Is because of the reasonable minds in the Republican Party and Kevin McCarthy, the people that have concerns about the future of the Republican Party. They know if this government was shut down, it would be absolutely devastating and might even decimate the Republican Party. So it made no sense. It made more sense for Kevin McCarthy to cave and get this deal done. And that's what happened. And I'm not surprised because, well, we've got a lot hanging there, and we've got an election coming up. Nobody wants to fucking deal with this shit. Nobody wants this to happen. It makes no sense. Nobody except the Freedom Caucus, MAGA, Matt Gaetz, and the like. They want it to happen because all they care about is chaos and bringing down this government. The quicker we all realize that, and the Republicans realize that, and we kick these motherfuckers to the curb, the better for this country. And we may be on the precipice of that, because Kevin McCarthy has now called Matt Gaetz's bluff. Kevin McCarthy has run around like a chicken with his head cut off because he's got this impending doom hanging over his head that MAGA is going to take his job away from him. Now Matt Gaetz has a choice. Show us what you got. Take the job from Kevin McCarthy. But if it fails, guess what? Kevin McCarthy's not afraid of Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus anymore. It changes the whole situation. So this week is going to be interesting. Will Matt Gaetz file this motion to vacate? And if he does it lose? It's going to lose. So Matt Gaetz may be cutting his own throat and cutting the throat of the Freedom Caucus as well. Well, now today is a big day. Everybody always says, when is Donald Trump going to pay a price? And we know in this lawsuit from Letitia James against Donald Trump, we already know that the judge in a summary judgment has found Donald Trump liable for all his fraud while he was in business. They are going to, they're putting in place a receiver. All his properties will be in receivership, and those receivers, their job is to dissolve those countries or companies. And that is going to be devastating. Still, there's a trial set to start today. And Michael Cohen said this about this upcoming trial when he was talking to Jen Psaki on Sunday. He said the fraud trial set to start Monday will be the death blow to Donald Trump. And I couldn't agree more. I know Donald Trump is worried about the prospect of going to jail, and he should be. But knowing Donald Trump's personality, he is more concerned with being broke or the perception of him being nobody or a loser. That's the one thing that will fucking kill him. A partial summary judgment handed down last week has already found him liable for fraudulently manipulating the value of his assets to secure loans. When he was talking to banks and insurance companies, he exaggerated upwardly the value of his property. But when it came to paying taxes, he said they were worth way less. So he makes more money from loans and from insurance. He does that by inflating the values of his properties. And then when he wants to save money on taxes, he drops the prices to a ridiculous amount. He did this. There is evidence that is illegal. This is why they're going to dissolve his companies. And this is why it is literally a death sentence to Donald Trump. Donald Trump won't know what to do if he's no longer perceived as a billionaire, smart guy, tough guy. This trial will point out that he is little more than a fraud and a loser. And that will be devastating to Donald Trump's psyche. Now, a civil trial into the former president's business operation set to start in New York today. And what this trial is essentially going to do, find out what the penalty is. We know Letitia James is asking for $250 million. Some people have said, well, he may not get that much. It won't matter if it's $100 million or $250 million. He doesn't have it. But the fact of the matter is it's not likely to be less than $250 million. It's going to be more, maybe considerably more, maybe double, maybe triple what she's asking. So this is going to be very interesting. And like I just said, Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, said it would result in Trump's biggest fear being realized. He says this is not only the main company now going into receivership, but there are hundreds of other subsidiary companies that additionally will ultimately go as part of the receivership. It is a financial catastrophe. It is the death blow to Donald. And I will tell you, during my tenure at the Trump Organization, I can tell you that this has always been his biggest fear, that he would lose money, that he would lose all of his money, and he would no longer be considered a mega billionaire that he tried to portray himself. Cohen said he will be at the trial Monday, but he said he thought there was a little chance that Trump will be, despite his saying that he was planning to attend. Yes, Donald Trump said he would be at this trial. But Donald Trump says a lot of shit and never follows through with it. So I would tend to believe Michael Cohen more that he won't be at the trial today. That said, he is scheduled to testify. So at some point, he will have to come to the trial. Even if he goes to the trial to plead the fifth, he'll still have to show up. Now, Michael Cohen said, knowing Donald the way I do, I would say there's less than a 20% chance that he actually shows up. What is he showing up for? To show up and to watch? He's not being called tomorrow. He's going to sit and watch as the judge listens to testimony based upon the evaluations were wrong and how the judge is going to determine the extent of the damage. So I think Michael Cohen's right. He probably won't be there today. Now, keep in mind, this isn't just about Donald Trump. Also being sued in this case is Eric Trump and Don Jr. They're not only going to take down Donald Trump financially, they're going to take those two fucking clowns down too, which is going to be interesting. If Donald can no longer have a business, what the fuck are Eric and Donald Jr. going to do? The only jobs they have were working for Daddy. Now, Daddy can't have a company. It's truly devastating to the entire Trump family. And for those people that said nothing's ever going to happen to them, well, it's already happened. The start of what's happening has begun. And this family, financially and in terms of business, are going to be decimated. Absolutely. And maybe you can tell I'm quite joyous about it. I can't wait to see how this all turns out and how devastating it is for the Trump family. All right, we are going to take a quick break and we will be right back. As we were talking about in the early part of the program during the email, we know that Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida says he plans to try to oust Speaker Kevin McCarthy after the California Republican worked with Democrats to avoid a government shutdown on Saturday. But we got a lot of things to look forward to this week. We've got Donald Trump's lawsuit starting today. At some point this week, Matt Gaetz says he's going to ask for a motion to vacate for Kevin McCarthy. We'll see if that happens. And there's probably many other things set to happen this week. Every week it's a shit show. And frankly, as long as it's something going against Donald Trump, you'll find me giggling like a little fucking girl because I love seeing Donald Trump finally being accountable. Now, Matt Gaetz said this. He said, Speaker McCarthy made an agreement with the House conservatives in January, and since then he's been in brazen, repeated material breach of that agreement, Gaetz told Jake Tapper. This agreement that he made with Democrats to really blow past a lot of the spending guardrails we set up is the last straw. I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week. I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with new leadership that will be trustworthy. Well, Matt, I'd like to ask you, who might that be? Who in your caucus can get 218 votes? Dare I say, fucking nobody. McCarthy responded to Gates on Sunday saying, "I'll survive." Yeah, he probably will, unfortunately. McCarthy said, "This is personal with Matt. Let's get over it. Let's start governing." Hey, there's a novel idea. Actually do something for the people in this country. Actually govern. Well, that would be a new idea for fucking Republicans. Now, with 3 hours to spare on Saturday, McCarthy proposed a bill that passed both chambers with bipartisan support and was signed by President Joe Biden to keep the government funded through November 17th at the current levels. That gives them 45 days at this point. Is that enough time for them to come up with a final budget? Well, fuck, I don't know. I mean, they've already been working on it 8 months and they dicked around and spent more time trying to impeach Joe Biden with no evidence. So, can they do it in 45 days? I don't honestly know. I don't know if they have it in them, but I think it probably will get done. It got very close to having the government shut down, and I think the Republicans know how damaging it will be for them should that happen. Now, as part of his negotiations to win the speaker position, of course, McCarthy restored the ability for just one member to make a motion to oust the speaker, which then prompted a House floor vote. Last week, Gates said he would constantly try to oust McCarthy. We're going to have votes regularly. If we have to begin every single day in Congress with prayer, the pledge, and a motion to vacate, we're going to do it. So this could be more than one motion to vacate. They'll have a motion, they'll vote, Matt Gaetz will lose, and then a couple days later, they'll do it again. It's all performative with Matt Gaetz and the Republicans, or the Trumplefucks at least. They don't care if it's fact-based or truthful or even possible. They're more than happy to embarrass themselves every fucking day. Now, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told Jake Tapper, on Sunday that she would absolutely vote to oust McCarthy. I think McCarthy is a very weak speaker, she said. He clearly has lost control of his caucus. He has brought the United States and millions of Americans to the brink, waiting until the final hour to keep the government open, and even then, only issuing a 45-day extension. So we're going to be right back in this place in November. So theoretically, it's possible that all Democrats will vote against Kevin McCarthy. So that will be a wash. And that would mean they'd need a certain amount in the Republican Party. But theoretically, the Democrats and 6 Republicans could oust Kevin McCarthy. I'd be surprised if they do that, though, because sometimes it's better to have the devil you know as opposed to what might be in there, unless the Democrats have a deal worked out with the reasonable-minded Republicans that maybe we'll get somebody not of the MAGA vein or not afraid of MAGA and get a more reasonable Speaker of the House. If it was just the Republicans, there's no way they're going to vacate Kevin McCarthy. There is just not 218 Republican votes. Now, the one thing I heard AOC say too, which is contradictory to what I just talked about, she said that the Democrats would not help Kevin McCarthy or Matt Gaetz just for the sake of doing it. If they're going to help either side, they're going to have to get something, some kind of allowances, some kind of cooperation, something. And that makes more sense. I don't know what that will be. I don't know if that's even possible. Will the Republicans work with the Democrats? I mean, let's be honest, with this continuing resolution, it was a Republican document, but more Democrats in a big way voted for this continuing resolution than Republicans did. I've told you this before. Republicans have a big problem. Before they ever fight the Democrats, they got to start unifying with themselves. but they can't do that. We have the MAGA fucks, we have the moderates, we have the centrists, we have the normal people in the Republican Party, relatively speaking, and we have the nutcases. They are never going to agree. Because while most of the Republicans may want the best for the people in the country, at least on their terms, that's not the case with MAGA. We're talking about 21 people, maybe 30, that just want to crash the country. That's all they fucking want to do. So as long as you give them the power to continue to do what they do, it's going to be a fly in the ointment for the Republicans henceforth. The only way around this for the Republicans is to kind of cooperate with Democrats, get their votes and get what they want done, and hopefully beat MAGA and Kevin McCarthy. Is that possible? I don't know. You would have thought they would have tried this before now, right after the 2022 elections, and the Republicans got the majority. They should have seen all this coming and the problems with the Freedom Caucus. At that point, it would have made sense to work with the Democrats and get something reasonable in terms of a Speaker of the House or everything else. But they haven't done it up to now. And that's why I always say, not all Republicans claim to be MAGA, but because they support and they cow and shy away from MAGA, they're just as bad as MAGA. So the whole fucking Republican Party have to be MAGA or Freedom Caucus or nut fucking cases. Now, as we talked about earlier, we know a lot of people are upset that the money to Ukraine was not in the CR, the continuing resolution. I told you not to worry about it, and that's pretty much what Joe Biden said. President Joe Biden said Sunday that American aid to Ukraine will keep flowing for now, as he sought to reassure allies of continued U.S. financial support for the war effort. But time is running out, the president said in a warning to Congress. We cannot, under any circumstances, allow American for Ukraine to be interrupted. Biden said in remarks from the Roosevelt Room after Congress voted late Saturday to avert a government shutdown by passing a short-term funding bill that did not include aid for Ukraine. Biden goes on to say, we have time, not much time, and there's an overwhelming sense of urgency. He said, noting that the funding bill lasts only until mid-November. Biden urged Congress to negotiate an aid package as soon as possible. The vast majority of both parties, Democrats and Republicans, Senate and House, support helping Ukraine and the brutal aggression that's being thrust upon them by Russia, Biden said. Stop playing games, get this done. Now, the Freedom Caucus will say, we've got to take care of what we've got at home. Why would we want to help Ukraine? Well, there's a good reason for helping Ukraine, and it has to do with something that politicians don't typically do, and that's looking ahead. You see, if Vladimir Putin and the Russians can just walk into Ukraine and take over, knowing that Vladimir Putin wants to somehow reform the Soviet Union, once they get into Ukraine, it's just a matter of time before they start hitting up NATO countries. And then when they start hitting NATO countries, then we're talking about the possibility of nuclear war. Isn't it better to stop them where they are now, keep the NATO countries safe, which is what we are supposed to do, and then maybe save us from some big nuclear war? I don't know. That just makes sense. That's looking ahead, and that's the smart thing to do. But again, MAGA doesn't give a fuck. All they care about is creating chaos and being contradictory to the Democrats. Now, many lawmakers acknowledge that winning approval for Ukraine assistance in Congress is growing more difficult as the war grinds on. Republican resistance to the aid has been gaining momentum in the halls of Congress. Voting in the House this past week pointed to potential trouble ahead. Nearly half of House Republicans voted to strip $300 million from a defense spending bill to train Ukrainian soldiers and purchase weapons. The money later was approved separately but opponents of Ukraine support celebrated their growing numbers. And on Saturday, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy omitted additional Ukraine aid from a measure to keep the government open. So they're presuming that the support for not giving Ukraine money is building amongst the Republicans in the House. But how much has it gained ground? Because again, you can't forget about the Democrats. The Democrats have 212 votes, and they would certainly vote to continue funding Ukraine. So that means you don't need all the Republicans to vote for it. You don't need half the Republicans to vote for it. You need like 6 Republicans. So I would think anytime something with Ukraine came through there, it would probably pass. I don't think that's going to be a problem. And for us to worry about that shit, that's just not worth worrying about. It will get taken care of. They're not going to abandon Ukraine. It would be stupid to do that. And the vast majority of people in Congress know that. Well, we know that Cassidy Hutchinson has a new book out, and it's revealing a lot of shit. Cassidy Hutchinson revealed in her new book enough that she was lugging around classified information in a Whole Foods bag after pro-Donald Trump reporters returned the documents to Mark Meadows. Did you hear what I said there? In a bag of classified documents. And she got them from some Trump supporting reporters, the media, and handed them back to Cassidy Hutchinson. Well, we're done. Thanks for the free information. And if that's true, that's highly illegal. And I'm guessing that Jack Smith already knows about this. This is part of his investigation. There was a guy, can't remember his name. His name was Scooter. I think it was Scooter or something like that. Older politician. And I think he was Dick Cheney's chief of staff or something. And he gave classified documents to the press. He ended up getting 30 months in jail, 400 hours of public service. And we know that Mark Meadows and Donald Trump has done this. So at the very least, there should be trouble on the horizon for these fucks for just this one incident. The documents were given to far-right writers Molly Hemingway and John Solomon, Hutchinson wrote. It infuriated the White House counsel who witnessed what happened. It was previously reported that Meadows made a last-minute mad dash for the Justice Department, claiming Trump declassified the information after Trump had already left the White House, according to Hutchinson. The DOJ refused to declassify the information, but Trump's allies maintained Trump filed the necessary paperwork in time. It was 15 minutes before President Joe Biden was sworn in as president. Can you imagine that? On Inauguration Day, Mark Meadows is running around trying to clean up his fucking messes, trying to get documents declassified because he knew he was in trouble. He knew what was going on here was wrong, and he knew it would come back to bite him in the ass. Now, at about 10:30 p.m. the night before, this is Cassidy Hutchinson talking, I saw Pat Philbin power walking toward my office. Great, I thought. What could possibly be going wrong now, she writes. Trump had already left the office and many other staffers carried their belongings out. How many copies of the Crossfire Hurricane binder did Mark make? Where are all the copies? Pat asked Hutchinson. How many of them have been distributed? Slow down, she told Philbin. How many copies? I have no idea. There are some in our office. She described many binders thrown around the room with still classified but supposedly soon to be declassified information. But the Crossfire Hurricane binders were easy to identify because of how thick they were. Now, he went on to say, did Mark already give copies to Molly Hemingway and John Solomon? Philbin asked. Hutchinson described them as the conservative journalist who the president and Mark were acquainted with. She goes on to say, yeah, he had a few of his Secret Service agents meet Molly and John in Georgetown earlier tonight while you all were in the Oval Office with the boss. The color drained from Pat's face. He said, seriously? The following day, a Secret Service agent dropped off a bag full of loose papers in the Whole Foods sack. It's unknown if the writers kept any documents and what they were given. You want to bet those writers get indicted too? What is certain, however, is that the act of giving classified information to reporters is exactly what sent Vice President Dick Cheney's chief of staff, Scooter Libby, that's the name I was trying to come up with, that sent him to prison, that very same act. In 2007, U.S. District Judge Reggie Walton sentenced Lewis Scooter Libby to 30 months in federal prison, imposed a $250,000 fine, and ordered Libby to undergo a further 2 years of supervised release, including 400 hours of community service. So this is some serious shit. And Mark Meadows did exactly what Scooter Libby did. Now, Libby was indicted in 2005 by a federal grand jury in the wake of a federal investigation into who leaked the name of CIA agent Valerie Plame to New York Times reporter Judith Miller. You remember that story. He ultimately made a plea deal, and President George W. Bush commuted his prison sentence, but left the $250,000 fine in place. Libby was ultimately found to have lied to the grand jury, obstructed justice, and false statements. Now, Richard Nixon's White House counsel, John Dean, wrote about the trial in 2006. Among the things explained are that special counsel Patrick Fitzgerald found Libby said that he was authorized by Cheney and Bush to leak the name to the Times. And if that's true, those motherfuckers should have been prosecuted too. But of course, back in those days, we just covered stuff up. Presidents and vice presidents got to do whatever they wanted. It just wasn't in the public like Donald Trump does, and they got away with it. Now, this revelation has been accompanied by a number of public misstatements which call for correction, Dean wrote at the time. The most blatant of these is the claim that Fitzgerald's filing indicates that the president authorized the release of Valerie Plame's covert status at the CIA. In fact, the document is conspicuously silent on this fact. The filing does indicate that the president authorized the release of classified information, but it was different information, a national intelligence estimate that had been classified pursuant to an executive order. So as I've said before, a lot of the stuff we're seeing now has happened in the past. It just wasn't in the public eye. We didn't have as much news coverage, 24-hour news cycles, and these people were a little better at being criminals than Donald Trump is. I mean, we should feel fortunate for the amount of crimes that Donald Trump has committed. We should feel fortunate that he's so fucking bad at it that he can't help but implicate himself every fucking day. And as I've said before, that may be the one positive thing that Donald Trump has done. Now that we know that some of these things have been done in the past, he's so stupid, he brings it to the surface. And now we know. They can't just bullshit us and lie to us and say, oh, it didn't really happen. It wasn't that big a deal, because we know exactly what happened. And we know it was a big fucking deal. All right. So after his speech on Sunday in Iowa, Donald Trump went to a farm to inspect a giant tractor. Wow, I had no idea that Donald was an expert on tractors. He's inspecting it. What's he looking for? While there, he attacked Representative Jamal Bowman a second time for pulling the fire alarm in the House office building during the main Saturday vote. Now, we haven't heard much about that. He did release a statement. I'll get to that in a moment. But while the Democrats were trying to buy time to read the continuing resolution, they were trying every trick in the book, all legal. For some fucking reason, Jamal Bowman went to a fire alarm, not in the same building, but it went off throughout all the Capitol and set off the fire alarm. Everybody had to leave the building. It wasn't that long, but it was long enough to delay the vote for the continuing resolution. I'm sure he thought he was doing a good thing, but how stupid is that? We know there are cameras all over the Capitol. It's going to show him pulling the fire alarm, and he's going to get some serious heat over it. And he is. Now, Bowman released a statement Sunday saying that he was trying to get out of a locked door in one of the office buildings to race over to the Capitol to vote. He did not, as previously rumored, pull the fire alarm to stop the vote. The alarm would not have stopped the vote as there were two different buildings. Did he know that? Did he know it wouldn't stop it? I don't understand how, if you come across a locked door, that you pull the fire alarm thinking it will open up. Well, I guess, maybe that's what happens. The doors open up so people can exit, but that's a pretty fucking risky thing to do. And you were in a hurry to take the vote. Why weren't you in the Capitol in the first place? Why are you lingering around in some other building? You have a job to do, and clearly this is fucking important. So be there on time. Now, still, Trump told the press that Bowman is just as bad as the January 6th attackers. So you're saying the January 6th attackers are, in fact, guilty. Such a dumb motherfucker. If you look what's happening to the Jan 6ers, Trump said, they're putting them in jail for years and years. And this guy pulled an alarm system. And to show you how corrupt they are, he then said when he got caught, he didn't know he was on tape. Isn't that wonderful? Donald Trump is making light or making fun of Bowman's alleged excuse. After all the excuses we've ever heard from Donald Trump, he has the audacity to do that. See, that's what Republicans do. Any little thing, they'll jump over it, all over it, exaggerate it, and try to equivocate it to the vast amount of criminal activity that the Republicans are responsible for. In fact, Bowman said he did not realize he would trigger a building alarm as he was rushing to make an urgent vote. You pull a fire alarm, but you didn't realize there would be an alarm. You see, I'm not buying that. Trump went on to rage at Bowman, calling him a radical left lunatic, and he should be prosecuted the same way as the January 6 people were prosecuted, and they've been treated. Many of them treated more unfairly than anybody in the history of this country. Now, see, that's where I have the problem. What Jamal Bowman did was stupid, but he didn't try to overthrow the country. He didn't try to undermine an election, and he certainly didn't bludgeon 150 police officers. There's a big difference there. Now, in Washington, D.C., the law states that anyone pulling a fire alarm upon conviction be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor and be punished by a fine not more than the amount set forth in 22-3571.01, or by imprisonment for not more than 6 months, or by both such fine and imprisonment. DC Law 18373 rewrote subsection and added subsection prior to an amendment. It shall be unlawful for any person or persons to willfully or knowingly give a false alarm of fire within the District of Columbia, and any person or persons violating the provisions of this section shall, upon conviction, be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor and be punished by a fine not exceeding $100 or by imprisonment for not more than 6 months or both. Now, we know there's a vast difference here in what happened with January 6th and this pulling of the fire alarm. We know the chief of the Oath Keepers militia was sentenced to 18 years in prison for seditious conspiracy and other related charges. Pulling a fire alarm isn't generally considered sedition. Now, Mehdi Hassan, who's on MSNBC, said, these are the same House Republicans who are perfectly happy to have Paul Gosar in their midst, who called for the execution of sodomy-promoting General Mark Milley just last week, and Lauren Boebert, who carried out a lewd act in an audience filled with kids last month. George Santos, who's under federal indictment, lied about his entire life. But they got worked up about Jamal Bowman setting off a fire alarm in Cannon's office, or in Cannon office. A fellow MSNBC host, Ayman Mohoyuddin, cut in to read Donald Trump's post on Truth Social, demanding the same fate as the January 6 defendants. He is now calling for Jamal Bowman to face the same fate as January 6 insurrectionists who were obstructing an official congressional proceeding. It's laughable to even see this. Every little thing that every other miscue or something that the Democrats do, they try to equivocate it to be as bad as what happened on January 6th. It's absolutely absurd. It's not going to go anywhere. And I don't know what's going to happen to Jamal Bowman. I think it was a pretty stupid thing for him to do. I'm not buying that he was just trying to get out of the door. I don't buy that at all. Thing is, he didn't even really need to do it. They probably had enough time to get this thing read, but I know he was probably thinking he was being slick like the Republicans and trying to help. But this is what the Democrats always do. Once they've got the Republicans over the barrel, they do something fucking stupid. Like Menendez taking bribes or Bowman pulling a fire alarm. Just fucking settle down. Let's bury the Republicans and then you can do your bullshit. Now, there was a guy on CNN. He was being interviewed by Jim Acosta. He is Representative Bob Good from Virginia. And he repeatedly dodged questions from CNN's Jim Acosta regarding if he will vote to oust Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. Since this is imminent, Matt Gaetz said he's going to call the motion to vacate. They asked this representative, this Republican representative, what are you going to do? You're going to vote to oust him? And this is how the conversation basically went. Acosta, are you going to support Matt Gaetz, his effort to remove McCarthy as Speaker? And could that play out this week? This is what Good said. Well, I will just say that what we saw happen yesterday was a repeat of past failures by Republican leadership. And frankly, that's what January was about. What I most spoke about in January during the speaker contests is that we couldn't do what we've done the last 10, 15 years when Republicans had a majority, which was to pass major spending bills with predominantly majority of Democratic voters. And that's what happened yesterday. And I urge my Republican colleagues, all 220 of my colleagues, along with the Speaker, that we cannot fear a government shutdown to the degree that we will do anything to avoid a government shutdown. And frankly, that's what yesterday was. Yesterday was a capitulation where we did an unconditional 45-day continuing resolution, keeping in place all of the Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer policies that are literally destroying the country, bankrupting the country with $200 billion monthly deficit. And so It was a failure yesterday. It was a failure of leadership, but we should not be buckling down and passing our spending bills and not kicking the can down the road. We should not have relieved the pressure unnecessarily. And the only reason we passed the 4 spending bills that we did, and I'll remind you, Jim, the Senate has passed no spending bills. The House has done 4. Speaker McCarthy committed we will do all 15, and that we would also vote on a balanced budget this year, and we've done neither one of those. Jim Acosta asked the obvious questions. So do you want them out? You see, Acosta asked the question. He gave this rambling diatribe and never answered the question. Oh, so Republican. Then Good responds saying, well, I was concerned about him as a speaker, as you know, as well on the record on that during January because of the failures of the past. This is a repeat of those failures. And what I'm focused on at the moment is trying to put pressure on to actually pass our bills. I'm glad we're coming back this week. Let's see if we have the commitment to the cutback to pre-COVID level spending out of the House as committed in January, as we voted to do that as a House majority in April. That's simply trying to cut $100 billion on our annual basis when we're running a $2 trillion deficit to implement on Republican conservative policies. Jim Acosta says, I guess, but I guess so. I guess you've just made up your mind. Just have you made up your mind yet, or what? What? Is that what you've been a critic of Kevin McCarthy for some time now? Why not say you're linking arms with Matt Gaetz and you're ready to oust him as a speaker? Well, this isn't about personalities or individuals. This is about doing the right thing for the country. Oh, that's ironic. Republicans saying doing the right thing for the country. Sorry, I'm not buying that shit. And what's right by the country is to cut our spending, reverse the policies that are destroying the country under Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer policies. See, he's asked the question 3 times, and he doesn't have the balls to answer it. If you don't like McCarthy, if you don't like what's going on, if you don't like the continuing resolution, naturally, it should be easy for you to say, yeah, I'm siding with Matt Gaetz. We're going to set up a motion to vacate. Why not just fucking say it? Because he doesn't know what the right thing to do is yet. He doesn't want to be on the losing side. So he doesn't know. And this is the problem with the Republicans. They go into all these things acting like they know everything, but it turns out they know nothing. And they will only respond unless to what everybody else is doing. We're not talking about individuals here. We're talking about a group, a rogue group of Republicans who, for whatever reason, band together to vote the wrong way, the way that they always fucking lose. It's frustrating. You would hope for better out of our politicians, but what we have in terms of Republican politicians and some Democrats in this country are absolute scurrilous fools. And that's the sad thing. And that's the one thing that we have to figure out and we have to straighten out if we want to get this country back on track. It's going to take a while to do that. The first step is to get the Republicans out of power in 2024 and then start working from there. Because even if there is a blue wave in 2024, we've got a lot of work to repair the damage that the Republicans have done thus far. And then when we repair the damage, we need to look at the Democratic Party and see where they're missing the boat, because they are in some situations. It all comes down to trying to get this country back to what it's supposed to be. And that's with you and I having control and not these elite motherfuckers doing whatever they want so they can fill their own pockets, Democrats or Republicans. All right, we are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I thank you very much for spending the time to listen, as always. I hope you have a great day. Today's going to be a big one. This lawsuit starting today, we're going to hear some interesting shit. But I hope you have a great day. And of course, we'll talk to you again tomorrow.